So dear beloved community, as we arrive this evening to sit, let's establish ourselves in our firm and stable posture, just ensuring that our two knees are in contact with the earth, or if we're sitting on a cushion, we can sit on the first third of the cushion. If we're sitting on a chair, our 2 feet can be firmly in contact with the earth. And then we can rock our body from side to side to invite a sense of uprightness to our body, inviting our vertebrae to rest one on top of the other. And then I always like to invite my friends to roll their shoulders back slightly to open their heart space. Then we can rest our hands in our lap and invite a sense of relaxation, ease, and openness to our physical posture and also to our mental attitude, gently closing our eyes and bringing our attention to the physical sensation of our in-breath and out-breath wherever we feel it the most in our body. Bringing the same quality of attention that you would meet to seeing a friend you haven't seen for a long time. Breathing in, being fully aware of your in-breath just as it is. As you breathe out, being fully aware of your out-breath just as it is. As I continue to rest my attention with my breath, I begin to notice that each breath is a new experience. I notice that some breaths are deeper, some are more shallow, some are faster, some are slower. So noticing the different nuances, the differences between each breath. Continuing to be aware of my breath, I notice a sense of calm in my mind, and at the same time, an ever-increasing sense of ease in my body, calming, easing. As I continue my awareness with my breath, I notice a smile blooming in each of the cells of my body. And as that smile blooms, I release all of my worries, my tensions, my anxieties. Smiling with every cell of my body, releasing. Breathing in and breathing out, I establish myself firmly in this present moment, deeply in contact with the wonders of this moment. Present moment, wonderful moment. Dear beloved community, it is June the 7th, if you can believe that, and we're sitting a little bit everywhere, all over the world. It's such a joy to be together with everybody this evening, to have a chance to practice together with everyone. This is truly a happy moment. Over the past many weeks in the Compassionate Ocean Sangha, we've been practicing and learning together about the 7 factors of awakening and the 5 hindrances. And as we came to the completion of that series, I asked our friends what they would like to receive teachings on. Now, it was interesting to see the reactions. Some of our friends were saying things like, God, I don't know, just say something about mindfulness. That's always good. And other people had many ideas. I asked the question not because I needed a topic to talk about. I had a few things that were in my mind, but because I feel it's a really important way to engage with the teachings, to be able to ask for teachings on a topic that we're looking into or that we'd find helpful for ourselves. So we opened a poll and everybody offered suggestions, and it looks like our friends would like to receive teachings on the 4 Nutriments, and then after that the Noble Eightfold Path, and then after that we'd like to have a deep dive into the Heart Sutra. So we don't have much to talk about over the next few weeks. So I'm looking forward to diving into these series, these numbers of series together with all of you. For the 4 nutriments that we'll be looking into together over the next few weeks, I invite you to approach these 4 weeks as a personal retreat, to take a week to look deeply into each one of the nutriments as we go through them. And for those of you who are in the Compassionate Ocean Sangha and practicing together with the Compassionate Ocean Sangha, then all of the activities and reflections and exercises that we practice this week in the Compassionate Ocean Sangha will have to do with the first nutriment, and then next week, the second nutriment, and so on. Additionally, there'll be a number of practices, suggested practices and reflection exercises that will be offered in the Facebook group through the week to help us really have a focus for our practice as we go through these days and weeks together. So what a wonderful opportunity. I'm looking forward to having a chance to practice together with you these next few weeks. I'll never forget a calligraphy that I once saw. It read, "The joy of meditation is daily food." I love that calligraphy so much because as a young practitioner, when I was still learning how to meditate, meditation was a real struggle. And it was rare for me to experience joy or ease in meditation. I felt that I needed to fight and to push through and to battle with aches and pains and distraction and frustration. I thought that someday, sooner or later, but most likely later, I would finally attain something. Maybe I'm the only one. That's always possible. Maybe nobody else has ever struggled like that with their meditation. Looking back, I've got a lot of compassion for that young practitioner. I remember how tight, how rigid, and how joyless my practice had become. And that simple calligraphy hanging on the wall, "The joy of meditation is daily food," struck a real chord in me. It was a reminder that our meditation can be a delight in and of itself, a form of nourishment. So I'd like to ask you, dear friend, if you're listening right now, I'd like to ask you, how is your meditation? Do you enjoy it? Do you experience your meditation practice as a form of nutriment? And if not, why not? If you answered yes, then what exactly do you enjoy about your meditation practice? What is it that nourishes you? What is it that brings you back to the cushion or back to your step or back to your breath, rather than just this sense of, "Oh, it's my daily routine"? What is it that nourishes you, that brings you to life with your practice? These are all very important questions. If we enjoy something, then it becomes natural for us to want to do it. There's no struggle at all. In fact, in Plum Village, rather than encouraging new practitioners to follow their breathing or to bring their attention to their breathing or steps, we invite them to enjoy their breathing or enjoy their steps. This is a beautiful way of relating to our breath, relating to our steps, to actually bring that sense of enjoyment, that sense of delight, rather than a sense of struggle. And so speaking about food in general, speaking about nourishment, there's a beautiful text in the Kudakapata, one of the minor collections in the Pali Canon, that I fell in love with. Now, I've been very open with all of you, my friends, that I am a sutra nerd. I love the texts. I love diving into the texts. Friends who've been enjoying a sutra class together with me over the last 2 months can attest to that. I love diving into the texts. I love looking into them. And I also like uncovering somewhat obscure texts that people don't tend to look at very often. And there was one text in the Kudakapata called the Questions to a Novice, which I particularly fell in love with. In fact, I fell in love with it so much that I wrote a book about it. It consists of 10 questions that were offered to a young novice. And they're all in the form of questions such as 1 is what, 2 is what, 3 is what, 4 is what, that form of questioning. And the very first question in that series of 10 questions that were asked to the novice Sopaka is the question of what is the one thing? And we can translate it as what is the one thing that connects everyone or everything? And the answer is that everything exists on food. Like the one thing that connects absolutely everything is that everything has been nourished. As we cultivate mindful attention through each moment of our daily life, we begin to become aware of the importance of mindful consumption. Buddhist meditation takes a holistic approach. We look at the whole person, not just at one aspect. So with anything that's arising, whether it's happiness, joy, peace, or whether it's anger or depression or jealousy, from the Buddhist perspective, it has been nourished in some way, whether consciously or unconsciously. And so these teachings on nourishment are incredibly important because they help us to be able to transform our situation in a very concrete way. We begin, as we become more sensitive to the role of nutriment on all its levels in our lives, we begin to be able to choose on all levels to consume items that bring about peace and happiness to our body and mind, and begin to be able to make choices not to nurture those things that are not in line with our aspiration. The longer that I myself practice meditation, and I consider myself a beginner, the longer I practice meditation, the more I'm convinced that one of the most fundamental and important teachings of the Buddha is the teaching on interacting with nutriment. It's also, funnily enough, one of the most overlooked in our modern context, even though it's incredibly important. I was really surprised when, I've been really surprised every time I've offered teachings on nutriments. I've done a number of retreats on this with friends, and each time it has seemed like new material for a large number of practitioners. And that surprised me because our teacher, Tay, really emphasized this teaching on the Four Nutriments. It's a concrete way to examine the roots of happiness and peace and suffering and despair in our own lives. Working with the nutriments in each moment can help empower us to interact more meaningfully with the stimuli that we encounter in our daily lives and begin to understand our own triggers of happiness and sadness. In our day-to-day lives, most of us have many responsibilities and other things to take care of. There are times when we completely forget to care for and nourish ourselves. There are times when we might feel like we're being pulled in 10 directions, at least 10 directions. And I find it ironic that for many of us on a spiritual path, the path of deep discovery, the path of the heart, that in caring for others and the world around us, many of us neglect taking care of ourselves, neglect looking into nourishing ourselves. It's almost as if on an unconscious level, nurturing ourselves seems to be like a senseless indulgence. Well, sure, it can be if we're talking about crushed pearl facials and chocolate baths, but you get my point. For most of us, though, self-care doesn't mean crushed pearl facials and chocolate baths. Nothing against them. It means choosing to be there for ourselves, to feel what we're feeling, and to come back home to our long-forgotten bodies. I don't consider that an indulgence at all. I consider it a necessity, and it's too often overlooked. Particularly if we have a mistaken view of spirituality as transcendence. With that mentality or that approach, then we can approach our body or our physicality or our embodied experience as an object, as something to be ignored. It might be helpful to take a moment to recognize those times in which we approach our meditation practice as if it's yet another thing to check off on our seemingly never-ending to-do list. And it's my hope that this series over the next few weeks will be an invitation for you to approach your meditation practice from the perspective of nourishing yourself, of opening your heart, of coming back home to what's real and alive for you in this moment. Why don't we enjoy a sound of the bell? I am aware that I'm getting older, like many of us. And not so long ago, I went to the optometrist. I was not seeing things as clearly as I used to see them. And so I went to the optometrist and I had my eyes checked, and the optometrist provided a prescription for me. When I put on those glasses, immediately, without any thought at all, I went, wow. I could see things so clearly. It was like I had a new set of eyes. And these teachings on the Four Nutriments are just like that. They're a set of lenses through which we can choose to look at our own experience and the world around. When I put on these new glasses, I was seeing things in a way that I hadn't seen them for a very long time. And I hadn't even recognized that I wasn't seeing things in the same way until the difference in vision became quite pronounced. And so these teachings on the Four Nutriments help us to see our everyday experience, the things that we've overlooked, with completely new eyes. When I discovered these teachings and I began looking into them deeply, I was so excited because they gave me an incredible lens, an incredible perspective through which to examine my own experience. Incredibly concrete teachings. In the Plum Village tradition, whenever we read a sutra, a discourse of the Buddha, we recite a short verse that says in part, "The Dharma is deep and lovely. We now have a chance to see it, to hear it, to study it, and to practice it." Lately, I've been using these lines as a reflection that I carry with me through the day. I might be the only one, that's always a possibility, but I notice that it seems quite easy for me to hear the Dharma and to study the Dharma. That's not too difficult, particularly in this day and age. We can pick up a Dharma book, we can listen to any number of Dharma talks a day. The access is not the issue at this moment in time, which is a wonderful thing. But it's more challenging to actually put these teachings into practice. We recite those words every time we listen to a Dharma talk or we read a sutra. But sometimes we forget that important word. We will put it into practice. So each time we hear a teaching, whether it's the highest teaching we've ever heard, something like a text from the Prajna Paramita fascicles, or whether it's a seemingly simple and concrete teaching, that question of how we can put it into practice is probably the most important question we can ask ourselves. Every time we hear a teaching, how do we put it into practice? And each time I encounter a text, even if I've read it or practiced with it 100 times, if I ask myself that question really, how can I put this into practice? Then each time I discover something new, because I'm also in a different place each time I encounter a text. It touches me in a different way. And before we move on, there's another word out of those 4 invitations in the sutra opening verse that verse that often we chant and don't really let register. And that is to see. We now have a chance to see. To see what? To see the Dharma. What does it mean to you to see the Dharma? We all understand what it means to hear the Dharma, to study the Dharma, and we kind of have a sense what it might be to practice the Dharma or to practice the teaching that we've heard. But something to look into might be, what does it mean to see the Dharma? When we make that that aspiration, when we recognize that we now have a chance to study, to hear, to practice, and then to see the Dharma, what does that really mean? What is that invitation for each of us? It seems to me that in our modern society, we've been conditioned to be consumers, always thinking that we lack something. I keep encouraging my friends to discern whether there are times that they might be bringing this attitude of lack and of needing to accumulate something to their spiritual lives. I believe that if we're sharp enough, and all of us are, then one teaching or one practice, or to use the analogy above, one lens, one new set of glasses, applied correctly, can be enough, more than enough, for us to transform our entire situation and to benefit those around us. The teaching on the Four Nutriments is exactly that kind of lens, that kind of practice. And I'm so excited we have a chance to look into it over the next few weeks. In the life of a meditation practitioner, there are many Dharma doors, many methods of practice offered by the Buddha. Traditionally, the number in the texts and the commentaries is listed as being 84,000. This is a symbolic number, which for those of us who are less mathematically inclined, like myself, basically means an awful lot. In my own Zen tradition, one of the four great fundamental vows is Dharma doors are limitless. I vow to enter them all. How on earth are you and I ever going to do that? We have trouble just following our breathing, letting our attention rest on our breath, one Dharma door, let alone mastering 84,000 of them. I don't know about you, but I find that pretty humbling when I consider that in the school of Zen, we make this vow to master all of these Dharma doors and practices. And yet, I actually love these vows, these four vows, because they're paradoxes. They invite me to step beyond labels, notions, and ideas of this versus that. I find that every time I contemplate these vows, my mind wants to grasp onto one extreme or the other, one side or the other. If practices and teachings are indeed limitless, if they're countless, if they can never be learned in their entirety, how on earth can I or we master them all? I felt that one possibility might be that if we are able to, or if we allow ourselves to enter one door, enter one practice deeply, then in some way we might be entering them all. Let's enjoy a sound of the bell. Back in 1997, when I was a very young monk, we had a 3-week interfaith Buddhist Christian retreat at Plum Village in France. On one day, a Dharma teacher from our community, from Plum Village, would offer a talk. And on the next day, the succeeding day, a Christian monastic or a teacher would offer a talk. Apart from the talks and a 1-hour discussion group in the afternoons, the rest of the retreat was completely in silence. During those 3 weeks, we discovered something interesting. When we met each other in the realm of ideas or concepts or dogmas, there was a certain amount of disagreement, a certain amount of debate. We had different approaches. But when we met each other in the realm of practice and embodied awareness, we were in perfect agreement. Given the vast array of the Buddha's teachings and methods of practice, it can be quite mind-boggling as to know which door and which practice we should choose. The invitation for us as practitioners is to consider our situation, the particular form of suffering that we experience, and to choose an appropriate door, an appropriate practice for our situation. And then to continue with the metaphor, to actually walk through the door of that practice, enter it deeply, and then fully experience the space and the joy that comes from entering the stream of the practice. Engaging with the teaching of the Nutriments, we have an opportunity to dive deeply into 4 areas of our spiritual life and see how they can be informed by nourishment. The practice of looking through the lens of the 4 Nutriments is a practice that's meant to be applied in each and every moment, in each and every circumstance. The teaching on the Nutriments is an elucidation of 4 interconnected kinds of nutriment of increasing subtlety, beginning with the easiest area of nutriment to focus on, down to the most subtle. They're all interconnected, they interpenetrate each other. So in the beginning, it might seem as if we're approaching each of the nutriments as a separate nutriment. And that might be helpful to do that as we go through these weeks, but please never lose sight of the fact that they're deeply interconnected, that each contains the other, that each, in a way, feeds the other. In the Samyutta Nikaya, there's a powerful sutra called the Puttamansa Sutra, the Discourse on the Sun's Flesh. When I first heard this sutra read, it deeply shocked me. It shocked me to my core. The intensity of the imagery was quite shocking to me. But I'm the kind of person that when I have a reaction like that, a reaction of deep shock, or in some sense, there's even a little sense of revulsion in me to some of the imagery, which did not seem really in line with the imagery that's most often used in the other teachings of the Buddha. It awakened in me a sense of curiosity. I wanted to know why I was having this reaction, first of all. And then why did the Buddha choose such strong imagery to present this message on the 4 nutriments? And as I reflected on that, it seemed to me that it could be that the Buddha chose these incredibly strong images to underlie the importance of nutriment. He wanted to shock us in a way, shock us out of our complacency, and to invite us into taking responsibility for transforming our situation. And at its core, that's what Buddhism is about. Understanding that you and me, we have the capacity to be able to transform our situation, that we're not victims anymore. We can choose, and we have the capacity to transform our pain into happiness, transform suffering into liberation. And the teaching on the 4 nutriments is one of the most powerful and concrete ways to be able to engage in that process of transformation moment by moment. When we engage with this teaching, we begin to understand the connection between what we consume and what we experience, including happiness, freedom, liberation and joy, as well as suffering and despair. The first of the four nutriments is called edible food. In the Pali language, it's Kabalinkarahara. I recently was asked to give a retreat on the Four Nutriments before the lockdown began to our wake-up friends, and I joked with our wake-up friends, if anyone can say Kabalinkarahara 7 times in a row, then they win the mindfulness award. Nobody's been able to do it yet. So the chance to win the mindfulness award is still out there, Kabalinkarahara. This is basically the food that we put in our mouths. We translate it as edible food. Now, it could be argued these days that some of the things that we put in our mouth that we call food are not necessarily foods in the usual sense of actually nourishing ourselves, but we'll leave that discussion for another time. Another way to look at this nutriment, in addition to edible foods, which we'll come into looking at more deeply in a moment, is in terms of our physicality. All of the tangible things, our environment, our bodies, and so on. In the Discourse on the Sun's Flesh, to underline the importance of edible food, the Buddha tells a shocking story. The Buddha tells a story of a husband and wife, some partners, and their only child, who they're traveling through the desert, and they run out of food and water. And after many days without food and water, they make a shocking and terrible decision. They decide that the only way for them to survive is to kill their child and to eat their child's flesh. The Buddha shares that he asks them, do you believe that this couple enjoyed eating the flesh of their only child? And the monks and nuns replied, well, of course they didn't. And then the Buddha invites us to look at edible foods in the same way, as if we're eating the flesh of our only child. This is indeed a strong image, isn't it? A shocking image. In the Plum Village tradition, we emphasize the practice of mindful eating, being aware of the food, looking deeply into the sources of the food, looking into all the different conditions that have come together to create the food that we're now bringing into our bodies. That in some way, when we look at a meal in front of us, we consider it to be not us. We have this idea that our self finishes at the level of the skin, and anything beyond the skin at this moment in time is not us. So as the food is sitting on the plate, it's considered to be not us. But then we take that food into our mouth, we chew it, we swallow it, and then at some moment, some indefinable moment, it crosses a barrier between what we call non-self to becoming part of ourselves. It nourishes all of the cells, the tissues in our body. It gives us conditions to be able to practice. It actually, in a concrete way, builds this thing that we call ourself. So even something as seemingly simple as looking at the food in front of us can be a profound contemplation. We really emphasize the practice of eating meditation in Plum Village. Now, in our day and age, many of us don't have the opportunity to look closely into the sources of our food. We're either too busy or we don't want to look either. Where does this carrot come from? What resources have come together to create this carrot? How much water is in that pound of beef? What chemicals were used to grow this food? What joy is in this carrot? What suffering is in the carrot? Look deeply into a carrot, for example. We can see the sun, the rain, the earth, the farmers. It might have been grown locally. Here where we live in Mountain Spring, we're lucky enough to know the farmer that grows the carrots, and we know where they're being grown. It's not very far away at all, but for a number of us, we're not in that situation. In industrialized societies, we have an abundance of food often available to us year-round. There's a lot of joy in our food, but it can also contain a great deal of suffering as well. When we reflect on edible foods as a contemplation, we consider all of these different aspects. As I mentioned, we do emphasize the practice of mindful eating. In many of our monasteries, we've noticed that it seems to be a very popular practice during our public days of mindfulness. In Deer Park, the monastery that I lived in for a long time, we might have on a Sunday of mindfulness 250 people in the meditation hall for the Dharma talk, but sometimes and somehow the number multiplies to well over 300 when it's time for lunch. It seems to be one of the most popular activities on a day of mindfulness. Many of us don't live in a practice center, and many of our meals are taken in a rush or when we're engaged in other tasks. My own younger brother who works in the corporate world tells me that he feels lucky if he has 5 minutes to eat a meal. Very often he's eating a meal on the run or in the car. And this is the situation for many of us. A mindful meal has become a luxury. As we can see from the strong image that the Buddha offers in the discourse on the sun's flesh, edible foods are of prime importance if we want to understand deeply how to nourish ourselves. When we eat, are we really present for the food? Can we take a split second to recognize what we're putting in our mouth? To take the example of the carrot earlier, can we take a split second to notice carrot, to notice that it's a carrot, and to put it into our mouth, and then chew the carrot thoroughly rather than just gulping it down? Can we really taste it? Can we really experience it? Can we notice some of the habit energies that we have around eating? In one thing, we can see many things. For example, let's imagine that we have a plate of food in front of us and we have just offered ourselves a spoonful of food. Many of us, we might be chewing the food already, but if we notice and we look, we're already preparing the next spoonful while we have a mouthful of food. Does that say anything about the way we relate to nourishment in our daily life? Perhaps we already have some conditions of happiness, but we're not allowing ourselves to be fully present for that. We're looking for the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. We can discover a lot through a seemingly simple practice such as eating meditation. There are a lot of wonderful practices within eating meditation. Even something as simple as looking into the sources of the food. If we notice that we're having experiences of happiness or sadness or depression or anger, whatever it might be, looking at the edible foods that we feed ourselves and noticing the effects those foods have on our body can be a very concrete way to understand their effects and the ways that they feed into these different experiences that we have. I invite you over the course of this week to make a commitment to find time to enjoy at least one meal every day as a mindful meal, taking your time. And if you don't have time, make time, even if it's only an additional 5 minutes. Many of us may not have half an hour to eat a meal like we do in the monastery. Honestly, there can be a perception about monastic life that we sit around and do nothing all day, which is kind of sometimes true. But we also have a lot to do as well. But choosing to eat a meal in mindfulness, choosing to eat a meal as a meditation, is exactly that. It's our choice. We arrange our day in that way so that we can enjoy these important practices. This is something that's possible even with many things to do. So even if it's only an additional 5 minutes and not 3 meals a day, I invite you to each day of this week, with this very basic practice of focusing on edible foods, to take some time for mindful eating. As you serve your food, in the monastery, we always need to line up behind others, and that, if you happen to be, for some of us, we're going back to work and there's cafeterias. If you happen to be with others and you're in line there, it can be a great practice to be in line behind others. A lot of interesting stories can come up in our minds during those times. Why am I always in the slow line? I always get in the slow line. Why can't I just for once be in the fast line? And then sooner or later, if you happen to be in my line, you arrive at the beginning of the serving area. And then we monastics have a practice that I invite you to do at home. You don't necessarily need to do this physically, but it's a nice practice to do. We take a moment in the monastery that whenever we see plates and bowls, whenever we come to the beginning of the serving area, we join our palms and we bow, recognizing that the plates and bowls are empty. Now, this is not emptiness in the philosophical sense, although that's also true. But this is taking a moment to notice that at this moment in time, there's nothing on the plate, there's nothing in the bowl. And so we have an opportunity to place some food on the plate or in the bowl. And that this is an opportunity that is denied to many. That there are even people in this area who don't have the opportunity to eat 2 or 3 times a day, as we do. So what a precious gift. It may not be our favorite food. It may not necessarily be exactly what we would choose, but the opportunity to nourish ourselves, to be fed, is a great gift. So with that spirit in mind, we go along in the monastery and we serve our food with that awareness and that intention. And then also taking what we need for our body as we go along and we take our food, rather than running here and there and getting a little spritz of this and a little piece of that. We very methodically go along and we take what we need for our body, which is often different from what we want. This is a very interesting practice to, as you are serving your food, even if you're not in the monastery, and most of us are not, at home. At home, you serve your food and you listen to your body as you're placing food on your plate. And looking at the colors, looking at the textures, looking at the amounts, and seeing what your body has to tell you about each of those items that you're putting on your plate. Even if it's something that you really love, you love the taste, you love the texture, is it something that your body loves? It can be an interesting exploration. And we also take what we're sure we can finish, knowing that there are many people probably not very far away that are quite hungry in this moment. And then we come and we sit down and we choose to have this time to truly nourish ourselves. In the monastery, we don't have electronic devices. We don't engage in a whole lot of conversation for the first part of our eating meditation. We're simply aware of the food and of each other. It is a beautiful practice to be aware of the ways in which the food nourishes us, but also each other's presence nourishes us. So in the monastery, we eat in silence for about 10 or 15 minutes. We treat it just as we would treat a sitting meditation. In fact, in Vietnam or in China, the dining hall is not called the dining hall in a monastery. It's called the Hall of the Five Contemplations. We treat it as reverently as we would treat a meditation hall. So we come in, we sit down, and we're choosing to nourish ourselves. This is a very deep practice. And then we eat slowly. We take our time to really savor the food. This is not because we're attached to all the flavors and the tastes and things, but rather because we want to be fully present for this act of nourishing ourselves on all levels. And also to listen to our body. It takes our body about 15 or 20 minutes to register that it's had enough. So if we bolt down the food, then often we can eat a lot more than our body actually needs. We chew our food thoroughly, at least 30 times. We can be a bit flexible. If you're eating like a consommé or a clear soup or something, or a split pea soup, you don't need to chew it 30 times. But basically we chew our food thoroughly, and we notice when the urge to swallow comes. We had one brother who grew up, he was an elder brother who was of French origin, but he'd grown up in Algeria just after the Second World War. And he was sharing with us that he noticed during his eating meditation that he would often have a mouthful of food, and he would, even with all of his best intentions, he would gulp it down and swallow it without chewing it thoroughly. Even though he really set the intention each time, he was unable to chew the food thoroughly. And then after a couple of years of practicing this and being aware of this tendency to gulp down the food, a memory came back to him. As he was growing up in Algeria at the time, in the expatriate French community over there, bread was quite rare. It was rationed. And he shared that as a young child, there was one day that he ate the family's whole ration of bread. He was gulping it down. Of course, he got into a lot of trouble about that later with his family. But that was the beginning of this habit energy of gulping down the food. So through something as simple as paying attention to a habit energy that we have, we can unlock something very deep in our lives. So I invite you, if you're at home, to turn off all of your mobile devices, turn off the TV, turn off all the other things, and choose to be there for yourself, to be there for your loved ones, and to choose to be there for the nourishment that you're offering yourself on the physical level. Look at the food, savor the aroma, and reflect on the sources of your food. Whether we're vegetarian, like we are, or whether we still eat meat, like some of us might who are listening to this talk, we can look deeply into the sources of our food and practice to enjoy our meal fully. Eating meditation can be a profound experience as we look at the food and reflect on its sources and connect with our beloved ones. It can be a deeply relaxing and healing practice. And this practice of eating meditation, this practice of being aware of physical foods, their sources, the happiness and the suffering that they contain, and their effects on our bodies individually, and the bodies of our families, and also the effects of our food choices on the earth, are the essential and foundational practice for us to explore the more subtle aspects of nutriment that we will over the next few weeks. So through this week, I have a few reflection questions for us to practice with. I'm also going to be posting them up in the Compassionate Ocean Facebook group for those of you who would like to be able to reflect on them individually or perhaps collectively, to be able to share with each other your reflections. You might use these as personal reflections or topics for journal entries, or maybe discussion topics in local sanghas, or again in the Compassionate Ocean Facebook group, if you would find that helpful. The first is, does my meditation practice feel as if it's a source of nourishment for me? What aspects of my meditation practice do I find easy and enjoyable? And what aspects do I find difficult? Why do I think that is? That's the first question. But you'll notice that there are a few questions in there. If I find that meditation practice is nourishing, what concrete nourishment does it provide me? Often we just stop with considering that, oh, I enjoy my meditation practice or it's nourishing, but we don't ask ourselves the next question, or we don't explore what exactly is the nourishment that it provides me. What's the joy? Where's the joy coming from? This is an essential question to ask. And then the third question for this week is, what inspires me to practice? What discoveries have I made through my practice life? And what transformations have I seen in myself and in others? Through looking at these questions this week and engaging in the practices of eating meditation, one each day, that will be offered in the Facebook group or through the course, then we'll have an opportunity to go deeply into this practice of edible foods through this week. And I hope that it's one of many blessings on your path. So dear family, it's been absolutely wonderful to be together. I wish you all the best this week. I'm especially happy that we all made it to the other shore this week. We all made it over to this room. This is the first of the new stage of the Compassionate Ocean Sangha practice. So for those of you who are members of the Facebook group, when you finish this Dharma talk, you'll see the new schedule for the Compassionate Ocean Sangha is posted in the Facebook group already. So we'll be having activities led by Dharma teachers, monastic and lay, and then Dharma teacher trainees, senior OI members, and also Sangha facilitators on a number of evenings through the week. So we'll continue with similar formats to what we've had before, and we're really excited to be able to broaden the facilitation and broaden the ways in which we present the practice over the next few weeks. So please do check that out. And it's also listed on the plumvillage.org/live website for those of you who connect through the Plum Village website. So dear family, it's been lovely to be together with all of you. I hope this Dharma talk has been helpful, and I wish you a joy-filled week of exploration of edible foods. We will end with the sound of the bell, and I invite you to find yourself in a comfortable posture, a posture in which you feel upright, stable, and relaxed. And just bring yourself back to your breathing. Just notice your in-breath and out-breath. Breathing in and in-breath just as it is. Breathing out and out-breath just as it is.